full moon hung over the village like a silver coin dropped from heaven's purse, casting long shadows across the cobblestone square where blood still stained the ground. The attack had ended hours ago, but the scent of violence lingered in the air, mixing with smoke from burning thatch and the metallic tang of fear that clung to every survivor's skin. Eldest stood before the Alpha King with trembling hands pressed against her worn skirts, her eyes downcast in the traditional posture of gratitude and submission. Behind her, 2 daughters waited in the moonlight, their faces pale as morning frost, their futures hanging in the balance of this moment. The village had been saved. The rogues who had descended upon them like locusts had been slaughtered by the Alpha King's warriors, their bodies now being dragged beyond the tree line where they would be burned come morning. 37 villagers had survived because Garrick Wolfsreach had heard their desperate howls and chosen to answer. Now came the reckoning, the debt that must be paid. Garrick stood with his arms crossed over his broad chest, his black hair falling past his shoulders, still damp with the sweat of battle. His leather armor bore fresh scratches, and dried blood flecked his beard, but his silver eyes were sharp and calculating as they swept over the gathering before him. He had killed 17 rogues tonight with his own hands, and his muscles still thrummed with the aftermath of violence, that sacred rage that lived in his bones. Around him, his pack warriors formed a semicircle of muscle and menace, their eyes glowing amber in the darkness, their bodies coiled and ready. They were extensions of his will, his fists, his fury. They would tear apart anyone who threatened their king without hesitation. But Garrick's attention was not on his men or the grateful villagers who knelt in the square. His gaze had fixed on something far more intriguing. Eldest cleared her throat, the sound breaking like thin ice over deep water. "My Lord King," she began, her voice wavering with exhaustion and desperation. "You have saved us from certain death. You have given us our lives when we had none to give ourselves. I have nothing of value to offer in return, nothing that could match such a debt. But I offer you what I can." She gestured behind her, and from the shadows stepped Kiva, the younger daughter. The girl was 19, with golden hair that caught the moonlight and tumbled down her back in waves that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. Her face was delicate, carved from porcelain, with wide blue eyes that sparkled with practiced sweetness. She wore a simple white dress that emphasized her youth and innocence, and she moved forward with small, careful steps, her head bowed in proper deference. "My youngest daughter, Kiva," Eldest continued, and there was pride mixed with sorrow in her voice. "She is untouched, pure, trained in the domestic arts. She will make a fine companion for a king. She is beautiful, obedient, and she will serve you well. I offer her to you as payment for our debt, as gratitude for our lives." The gathered villagers murmured their approval. It was a generous offer, a valuable one. Kiva was the jewel of the village, the girl every young man had courted, and every mother had eyed for her son. To give her to the Alpha King was to give the most precious thing the family possessed. Garrick's eyes flickered to Kiva for the briefest moment. He saw what everyone else saw: beauty, youth, compliance. She was lovely as a summer morning, as predictable as sunrise. She would smile when told to smile, speak when spoken to, bend when he required bending. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. He felt absolutely nothing. His gaze moved past Kiva, drawn by something he could not name, pulled by an instinct that lived deeper than thought. There, standing slightly behind and to the left of her mother, was the other daughter, Elodie. She stood differently than her sister, her spine straight as a sword blade, her chin lifted in a way that suggested she bowed to no one, not even kings. Her white hair fell around her shoulders like fresh snow, stark against the deep crimson of her dress, a color that spoke of blood and fire and things that refused to be tamed. Her skin was pale as moonlight, but her eyes burned with an inner intensity that made Garrick's breath catch in his chest. Where Kiva's gaze was downcast and demure, Elodie's eyes met his directly, unflinching, challenging. There was a wildness in her that called to something primal in him, something that recognized its match across the crowded square. During the attack, he had seen her. While others ran or hid or wept, Elodie had fought. She had picked up a fallen pitchfork and driven it through the chest of a rogue who had cornered a group of children. She had screamed her defiance at the sky, her white hair streaming behind her like a war banner, and she had not backed down even when the rogue's claws had raked across her arm, leaving 3 crimson lines that still wept blood through the torn sleeve of her dress. Garrick had killed that rogue himself, had torn out its throat with his bare hands. But the image of Elodie fighting had seared itself into his mind like a brand. He had seen the fire in her eyes, the refusal to surrender, the magnificent fury of a woman who would rather die standing than live kneeling. And now, watching her stand in the moonlight with blood still on her dress and defiance still in her gaze, he felt something shift inside his chest, something that had been dormant for so long he had forgotten it existed. Want. Need. Recognition. The silence stretched as Garrick stared at Elodie, and she stared back, neither giving ground. Around them, the villagers began to shift uncomfortably. Ardis glanced between her daughters and the Alpha King, confusion creasing her weathered face. "My lord," she ventured carefully, "do you find my offer acceptable?" Garrick's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. His silver eyes never left Elodie's face as he spoke, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in the chest of everyone who heard it. No, the word fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the gathering. Ardis's face went white, and Kiva's perfect composure cracked, her eyes widening with confused hurt. "My lord, I don't understand," Ardis stammered. "Kiva is the finest of my daughters. She is beautiful and trained and willing. What more could you want?" Garrick finally tore his gaze from Elodie to look at her mother. When he spoke, his voice was firm, but not unkind. "I want her." He lifted one hand, pointing directly at Elodie, and the gesture felt ceremonial somehow, like an ancient rite being performed under the full moon. "The eldest daughter, Elodie Stormcloak. She is what I want." The square erupted into whispers and gasps. Ardis looked as though she might faint, swaying on her feet. Kiva's face flushed with humiliation, tears springing to her eyes before she turned and fled into the darkness, her white dress disappearing like a ghost into the shadows. But Elodie did not move. She stood perfectly still, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and when she spoke, her voice was as cold as winter wind. "No." The single word rang out clear and absolute. Several of Garrick's warriors growled low in their throats, their eyes flashing with offense at her defiance. To refuse the Alpha King was unthinkable, was suicide, was an insult that could not be borne. But Garrick raised one hand, silencing his men instantly. His eyes had never left Elodie's face, and now they glittered with something that might have been amusement, or might have been the first stirrings of obsession. "No," he repeated, his voice soft and dangerous. Elodie took a step forward, moving out from behind her mother, and Garrick could see the way her body trembled with suppressed emotion, with fury and fear and a stubbornness that would not bend. "No," she said again, louder this time. "My mother may offer what she wishes, but I belong to myself. I do not need a man, king or otherwise, to define my existence. I do not need protection or provision or any pretty promise you might make. I have survived this long on my own strength, and I will continue to do so. Find yourself another prize, Your Majesty. I am not available." The square had gone utterly silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the Alpha King's response to such unprecedented defiance. His warriors watched with tense bodies, ready to leap forward and teach this insolent woman her place. to show her what happened to those who refused their king. But Garrick surprised them all. He threw back his head and laughed. The sound was rich and genuine, rolling across the square like thunder, and it transformed his face completely. The harsh lines of his features softened, and for a moment, the villagers could see not the fearsome Alpha King who had slaughtered their enemies, but a man who had just encountered something that delighted him beyond measure. When his laughter subsided, he looked at Elodie with open appreciation, with respect, and yes, with desire, but desire tempered by something deeper and more patient. "Very well, Elodie Stormcloak," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a promise and a threat all at once. "I accept your refusal. For now." He turned to Ardes, who stood frozen in shock and horror. "Tell your daughter that her debt is paid by her courage tonight. She fought when others fled. She protected the weak when she could have saved only herself. That is worth more to me than any offered sacrifice. Your family owes me nothing." Before anyone could respond, before Elodie could fully process what he had said, Garrick turned and walked away, his warriors falling into formation around him. They moved like shadows across the moonlit square, disappearing into the forest beyond, leaving only the echo of their footsteps and the lingering scent of wild magic in the air. Elodie stood trembling in the aftermath, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. She told herself it was relief she felt, that the tightness in her chest was simply the release of tension, that the way her skin still tingled where his gaze had touched her meant nothing at all. But as she watched the darkness where he had disappeared, she could not shake the feeling that something had just begun, something that would not be denied or dismissed or locked away, no matter how firmly she barred the door. The moon continued its arc across the sky, uncaring and eternal, witness to the moment when two souls had looked at each other and recognized something that defied all logic and all reason. The moment when everything changed. The castle of Shadowmere rose from the mountainside like a crown of stone and shadow, its towers piercing the low-hanging clouds that perpetually shrouded the peaks. Garrick stood on the balcony of his chambers, his hands gripping the cold stone balustrade, his eyes fixed on the distant valley, where smoke still rose from the village he had saved 3 days ago. 3 days, and he could not stop thinking about her. This was madness. He was the Alpha King, ruler of 7 territories, commander of the most powerful pack in the northern reaches. He had responsibilities that spanned from the eastern coast to the western mountains, alliances to maintain, enemies to crush, a kingdom to govern. He did not have time to obsess over a white-haired woman with fire in her eyes who had rejected him without a moment's hesitation. And yet, here he stood, his mind returning again and again to the moment she had looked at him and said no with such absolute conviction that it had struck him like a physical blow. He had bedded many women over the years, beautiful women, willing women, women who had fallen over themselves for the chance to warm the Alpha King's bed. He had taken his pleasure where he found it and moved on without a backward glance, his heart untouched, his soul unmoved. But Elodie Stormcloak had awakened something in him that he had thought long dead, something hungry and desperate and alive in a way that terrified him, even as it exhilarated him. He wanted her. Not just her body, though gods knew he wanted that with an intensity that kept him awake at night, his skin hot, and his mind filled with images of white hair spread across his pillows, and pale skin flushed with passion. But he wanted more than that. He wanted her fire, her defiance, her strength. He wanted to see her eyes soften when she looked at him. He wanted to hear her laugh. He wanted to know what she thought about when she stared at the stars, what dreams she harbored in that magnificent, stubborn heart. He wanted everything she was, and she had made it abundantly clear that she wanted nothing to do with him. The realization should have cooled his interest. Garrick was not a man who chased after women who did not want him. He had too much pride for that, too much dignity. But dignity seemed to matter very little when measured against the ache in his chest every time he thought of her walking away. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Marcus, his second in command, entering the room with a concerned expression on his scarred face. "You're brooding again," Marcus observed, crossing his arms over his chest. "You've been standing on that balcony for 2 hours, staring at nothing." "The council meeting started 20 minutes ago." Garrick sighed and pushed away from the balustrade. "I'm aware." "Then why aren't you there?" "Because I can't concentrate on trade agreements and territorial disputes when all I can think about is a woman who wants nothing to do with me." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then shook his head with something that might have been sympathy. "The white-haired one from the village? The one who told you no?" "Her name is Elodie." "I know her name, my lord. Everyone in the castle knows her name. You've spoken it enough times in the past 3 days." Garrick felt heat rise to his face, an unfamiliar sensation that reminded him uncomfortably of his youth. "I have not." Marcus raised one eyebrow. "You've asked the scouts about her family 7 times. You've inquired about her health twice. You've ordered provisions sent to her village specifically designated for her household. You've requested detailed reports on the reconstruction efforts with emphasis on her dwelling. And yesterday, you asked me if I thought white hair was attractive. I was making conversation." "You never make conversation." Garrick glared at his second, but there was no real anger in it. Marcus had served at his side for 15 years, had saved his life more times than either of them could count, and was one of the few people in the world who could speak to him with such familiarity, without fear of retribution. "What would you have me do?" Garrick asked, and there was a note of genuine desperation in his voice that he hated. She made herself clear. She doesn't want me. She doesn't want any man. She wants to be left alone. Marcus moved to stand beside him, looking out over the same valley that held Garrick's attention. "So leave her alone." "I can't." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Garrick felt something in his chest twist painfully, and he realized with sudden clarity what was happening to him. The mate bond. It was rare among alphas, rarer still to feel it so strongly with a human woman who carried no wolf blood. But he knew the signs because his father had described them once, in a rare moment of vulnerability before his death. "You'll know her when you find her," his father had said. "You'll feel like you can't breathe properly when she's not near. Like the world has lost its color. Like everything you built and fought for suddenly means nothing if you can't share it with her." "That's ridiculous," Garrick had scoffed. "I'm not some romantic fool." His father had smiled sadly. "Neither was I, son. Neither was I." Now Garrick understood. The mate bond didn't care about pride or logic or careful planning. It simply was, as inevitable as the turning of seasons, as undeniable as the pull of the moon. "She's your mate," Marcus said quietly. And it wasn't a question. Garrick nodded slowly. "I think so. I've never felt anything like this. It's like she's burned herself into my bones, and I can't stop thinking about her, can't stop wanting her, even though she made it perfectly clear that she wants nothing to do with me. Then you court her." Garrick turned to look at his second in surprise. "Court her. You heard her. She doesn't want to be courted. She doesn't need a man. She'd probably stab me if I showed up on her doorstep with flowers and pretty words." Marcus shrugged. "So don't be a man courting a woman. Be a king earning the respect of his equal." Garrick felt something shift in his mind, a new perspective sliding into place. "You're saying I should prove my worth to her. I'm saying you should show her that you see her for who she is, not what she looks like or what she could give you. She's not some prize to be won, my lord. She's a warrior in her own right. She fought with a pitchfork against trained rogues. She protected children while wounded. She looked at the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories and told him no without flinching. That's not a woman who needs a protector. That's a woman who needs a partner." Garrick felt something very close to hope kindle in his chest. "And how do I show her that?" Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face. "You're the strategist, my lord. You've conquered territories and won wars. Surely you can figure out how to win one stubborn woman's heart." After Marcus left, Garrick stood alone in his chambers, his mind already working through the problem, as he would a military campaign. He couldn't approach Elodie directly. She would see it as pressure, as an attempt to wear down her defenses. He couldn't shower her with gifts. She would view it as an attempt to buy her affection. But he could show her respect. He could demonstrate that he valued her strength and her independence. He could prove that he saw her not as a possession to be claimed, but as an equal to be honored. It would take patience. It would take subtlety. It would take every bit of cunning and strategy he had developed over years of warfare and diplomacy. But Garrick Wolfsreach had never backed down from a challenge in his life, and he wasn't about to start now. Especially not when the prize was worth more than all the territories he had conquered, and all the battles he had won combined. He would win Elodie's heart. Not by force or coercion or manipulation, but by proving to her that he was worthy of the gift she represented. And if it took the rest of his life, so be it. The days that followed saw a subtle change in the village of Ashford's Landing. Resources arrived with clockwork regularity, building materials and food supplies, healing herbs and skilled craftsmen to help with the reconstruction. But unlike the usual charity that came from the crown, these supplies were accompanied by respect. The Alpha King's representatives didn't swagger or demand or act as though the villagers should be grateful. They worked alongside the people they were helping, asked for input on where resources would be most useful, and treated everyone from the eldest elder to the youngest child with equal courtesy. And Elodie noticed. She tried not to. She told herself that the Alpha King's generosity meant nothing, that he had simply done what any decent ruler would do for a village that had been attacked. But she couldn't help but see the way the representatives carefully ensured that her mother's house was rebuilt first, the way supplies seemed to arrive exactly when they were needed most, the way problems were solved before they could become crises. It was subtle. It was respectful. It was exactly the kind of help she would have wanted if she had been asked, which made it all the more irritating. Elodie stood in the doorway of her newly repaired home, watching as the last of the construction crew packed up their tools. The house looked better than it had before the attack, with a new roof that wouldn't leak come winter and walls that had been reinforced against future assaults. Her mother was inside, hanging curtains in the kitchen, singing softly to herself with a contentment that Elodie hadn't heard in years. Kiva had left the village 2 days after the attack, unable to bear the humiliation of being rejected in favor of her older sister. She had gone to stay with distant relatives in the capital, and while Elodie felt a pang of sadness at her sister's absence, she couldn't bring herself to regret what had happened. Kiva would find a good husband in the capital, someone who appreciated her beauty and her sweetness. She would be happy, but Elodie couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished, that the Alpha King's departure had not been an ending, but a beginning. She had caught herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit, the way his eyes had gleamed in the moonlight, silver and intense, the way his laughter had transformed his face from something fearsome to something almost beautiful, the way he had accepted her refusal without anger or retribution, with what had seemed like genuine respect. "Stop it," she muttered to herself, turning away from the doorway. "You don't need him. You don't want him. He's just a man, and men are nothing but trouble and disappointment wrapped in attractive packaging." But even as she told herself this, she remembered the feel of his gaze on her skin, the way something in her chest had tightened when he had pointed at her and said, "I want her," with such certainty that it had felt like fate itself speaking. "Elodie?" her mother called from inside. "Can you help me with these curtains?" Grateful for the distraction, Elodie stepped inside and spent the next hour helping her mother settle into their improved home. But even as she worked, even as she smiled and laughed and tried to focus on the present moment, part of her mind was elsewhere, wandering down dangerous paths she knew she should avoid. 3 weeks after the attack, Elodie made a decision that would change everything. She had grown restless in the village, her energy and her need for purpose finding no outlet in the peaceful days of reconstruction. She was not meant for domestic life, for cooking and cleaning and waiting for some man to give her life meaning. She was a fighter, a protector, and she needed to feel useful. So when whispers reached the village of bandits operating on the forest road between Ashford's Landing and the next settlement, Elodie made up her mind to do something about it. She would scout the road, gather information, and report back to the village elders so they could request proper patrol assistance from the Crown. She told her mother she was going to visit a friend in the next village, packed a small bag with supplies, and set out just after dawn. The forest road was beautiful in the early morning light, dappled with sunshine that filtered through the autumn leaves. Birds sang in the branches overhead, and the air was crisp with the promise of coming winter. Elodie walked for 3 hours without incident, her hand never straying far from the small knife she kept belted at her waist. She was alert, but not afraid, her senses attuned to the forest around her, listening for anything out of place. She heard them before she saw them, the sound of breaking branches, of heavy footfalls trying and failing to be stealthy. Elodie's hand went to her knife as she turned to face the threat, her body coiling into a defensive stance that she had learned from watching the Alpha King's warriors during the attack on her village. 5 men emerged from the trees, their faces hard and hungry, their clothes stained with dirt and worse. Bandits, just as the rumors had said, and from the way they looked at her, they saw easy prey. "Well, well," the leader said, his scarred face splitting into a grin that revealed missing teeth. "Look what we have here, boys. Pretty little thing all alone in the woods. Must be our lucky day." Elodie's grip tightened on her knife. "If you leave now," she said, her voice steady despite the fear beginning to curl in her gut, "I won't report you to the authorities. Walk away." The bandits laughed, the sound ugly and mocking. One of them, a tall man with a crooked nose, stepped closer. "We ain't walking nowhere, sweetheart. You're going to give us everything you got, and if you're nice about it, maybe we'll let you walk away after." Elodie's mind raced. 5 against 1. Trained fighters against a woman with a small knife, and courage that suddenly felt inadequate to the situation. But she had never backed down from a fight in her life, and she wasn't about to start now, even if the odds were impossible. "I said leave," she repeated, pulling her knife free and holding it before her. "I won't ask again." The leader's grin faded, replaced by something darker. "Brave one, ain't you? That's fine. I like it when they fight." They rushed her all at once. Elodie fought like a demon. She ducked under the first man's grab, slashed her knife across his arm, drawing blood and a howl of pain. She kicked out at another, her boot connecting with his knee with a satisfying crunch. But there were too many of them, and they were too fast. Hands grabbed her from behind, wrenching the knife from her grip. She screamed her fury, twisting and clawing, refusing to give up even as they forced her to the ground. This is where she would die, she realized with crystal clarity. Alone on a forest road, killed by men who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience and a prize. Her mother would never know what happened to her. The village would whisper about her disappearance. And the Alpha King would never know that in her last moments, she had thought of him, had wished with desperate intensity that he was there. The leader raised his fist, and Elodie braced herself for the blow. It never came. Instead, there was a roar that shook the very trees, a sound of such primal fury that it froze every living thing in the forest into terrified stillness. The bandits looked up just in time to see death descending upon them in the form of the Alpha King himself. Garrick moved like violence given form, like every nightmare the bandits had ever had made flesh and fury. He caught the leader by the throat and threw him against a tree with enough force to crack the trunk. Another bandit tried to run, but Garrick was faster, his hand closing around the man's neck before snapping it with casual ease. Blood sprayed across the fallen leaves, painting the peaceful forest in shades of crimson. The remaining 3 bandits tried to fight back, pulling weapons and screaming their defiance. It made no difference. Garrick tore through them like a storm, his movements precise and devastating, his face a mask of such absolute rage that Elodie, still pinned to the ground, felt something in her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. This was the Alpha King in his element, the warrior who had conquered territories and crushed rebellions, the predator at the top of the food chain. His black hair flew wild around his face, his eyes glowed with silver fire, and his hands were stained red with the blood of men who had dared to threaten what was his. In less than 2 minutes, all 5 bandits lay dead or dying on the forest floor. The sudden silence was deafening. Elodie pushed herself up on shaking arms, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She was covered in dirt and leaves, her dress torn, her body aching from the brief struggle. And then Garrick was there, dropping to his knees beside her, his blood-stained hands hovering over her, as though he was afraid to touch her, afraid that even his gentleness might cause her harm. "Elodie," he breathed, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Tell me you're all right." She stared at him, at this man who had just killed 5 people with his bare hands, who was now looking at her with such desperate concern that it made her throat tighten. His silver eyes were no longer cold or calculating. They were blazing with an emotion so intense it took her breath away. "How did you know I was here?" she whispered. Garrick's jaw clenched. "I felt it. I felt your fear. I felt your pain. I was in a council meeting, and suddenly I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything except the certainty that you were in danger. I shifted and ran without explanation, without guards, without anything except the knowledge that if I didn't reach you in time, something vital in me would break forever." The mate bond, Elodie realized with stunning clarity. She had read about it in old stories, had heard whispers of the connection that sometimes formed between alphas and their destined partners. A bond that transcended distance and logic, that tied 2 souls together in ways that defied explanation. She should have been angry. She should have pushed him away, should have maintained her independence and her determination to need no one. But she was so tired of fighting, tired of pretending that she didn't feel the pull toward this man, tired of denying what her heart had known from the moment their eyes met in the village square. Garrick was still watching her with agonized intensity, waiting for her response, his entire body tense, as though he expected her to reject him again. And something in Elodie's chest cracked open, all her carefully constructed walls crumbling in the face of the truth she could no longer deny. She reached up with a trembling hand and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his beard and the warmth of his skin. His eyes closed at her touch, and a shudder ran through his massive frame, as though her gentleness was more devastating than any blow. "You came for me," she said softly. "I will always come for you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I will always protect you. I will burn down the world to keep you safe. You are mine, Elodie Stormcloak, whether you accept it or not. You are written into my very bones, and I am yours if you'll have me." Something shifted in the air between them, something profound and irrevocable. Elodie looked at this man who had saved her village, who had respected her refusal, who had somehow known when she was in danger and had come to her without hesitation. She saw past the Alpha King, past the warrior and the conqueror, to the soul beneath that called to her own, with a voice she could no longer ignore. "Kiss me," she whispered. For a heartbeat, Garrick didn't move. Then, with a sound that was half groan and half prayer, he gathered her into his arms and claimed her mouth with his own. The kiss was everything Elodie had never allowed herself to want. It was gentle and fierce all at once, tender and desperate, a promise and a claim and a surrender all wrapped into one perfect moment. His lips were warm against hers, his hands cradling her face as though she was something precious and fragile, even though they had just been stained with the blood of her enemies. Elodie melted into him, her fingers tangling in his long black hair. her body pressing against the solid strength of his chest. She could feel his heart pounding against her own, could taste the salt of his skin and the hint of wildness that clung to him like a second skin. This was what she had been denying, what she had been fighting against with every fiber of her stubborn will. This was home. This was right. This was inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrick rested his forehead against hers. His silver eyes were molten, his voice barely above a whisper when he spoke. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I first saw you." Elodie laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. "I've wanted to let you do that since the moment you walked away from my village." "So why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid." She met his gaze, letting him see the truth in her eyes. "I was afraid that if I let myself need you, I would lose myself, that I would become just another possession, another pretty thing for you to keep and control." Garrick's expression softened, and he cupped her face in his large hands, his touch impossibly gentle. "Elodie, you are not a possession. You are a force of nature. You are the strongest person I've ever met, and I don't want to control you. I want to stand beside you. I want to fight with you, not against you. I want to build something with you that neither of us could build alone." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I don't want a pretty ornament for my castle. I want a partner. I want a queen who will challenge me and push me and make me better than I am. I want you, exactly as you are, fierce and stubborn and magnificent. And I will spend every day of my life proving that you can be my mate and still be completely, entirely yourself." Elodie felt tears prick at her eyes, and she realized with surprise that they were tears of relief, of joy, of something that felt dangerously close to love. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever seen her strength as something to be celebrated rather than tamed. "Stand up," she said suddenly. Garrick blinked in confusion, but obeyed, rising to his feet and extending a hand to help her up. She took it, letting him pull her upright, swaying slightly as her body reminded her of the fight she had just survived. She looked up at him, at this man who towered over her, who could crush her with one hand, who commanded armies and ruled territories. And she realized that she wasn't afraid of him at all. She was terrified of how much she wanted him, of how right it felt to be near him, of how completely he had managed to slip past every defense she had ever built. "Take me to your castle," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Show me this partnership you're offering. Prove to me that I can be your queen without losing the woman I fought so hard to become." Garrick's face transformed with joy, so pure it took her breath away. Without a word, he scooped her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest. She should have protested, should have insisted on walking, but something about being held by him felt too good to resist. "Hold on," he murmured, and then he was moving, running through the forest with supernatural speed that blurred the trees around them into smears of color. Elodie wrapped her arms around his neck and held on, her white hair streaming behind them like a banner, her laughter mixing with the wind as they raced toward a future she had never dared to dream of. Behind them, the bodies of the bandits lay cooling on the forest floor, silent testimony to what happened to anyone who dared threaten what belonged to the Alpha King. And ahead, past the trees and the mountains and the miles that separated them from Shadowmere, a new chapter was beginning, one written not in submission or surrender, but in partnership and respect, and a love that had been forged in fire and blood, and the stubborn refusal of two people to be anything less than exactly who they were. The castle of Shadowmere rose before them like a promise carved from stone and shadow. Elodie had seen it from a distance before, a dark silhouette against the mountains, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it up close. The towers soared toward the sky, their banners snapping in the wind. The walls were thick enough to withstand any siege, but they were beautiful too, carved with intricate designs that spoke of a history older than memory. Garrick carried her through the main gates, and Elodie was immediately aware of the dozens of eyes watching them. Warriors lined the courtyard, their faces carefully blank, but their eyes sharp with curiosity. Servants paused in their work to stare. And standing at the top of the main stairs was Marcus, Garrick's second in command, his scarred face split with a knowing grin. "Welcome back, my lord," Marcus called. "I see you found what you were looking for." Garrick's arms tightened around Elodie possessively. "This is Elodie Stormcloak. She will be staying at the castle as my guest. Anyone who disrespects her answers to me personally." The threat was implicit, but clear, and Elodie saw several warriors straighten their postures, their expressions shifting to something more carefully neutral. She might have bristled at being defended like this once, but now she understood the political reality of her situation. She was a human woman with no title or rank, being brought into the heart of alpha power. Garrick's protection was not an insult. It was a necessity. Still, she couldn't resist whispering in his ear. "I can defend myself, you know." His lips curved into a smile against her hair. "I know. But let me have this. Let me show them that you're mine to protect, even if you don't need protecting." She considered this, then nodded. "As long as you remember that I'm not helpless." He set her down carefully, but kept one hand on the small of her back, a gesture of both possession and support. His silver eyes swept over her torn dress, her disheveled hair, the dirt on her face, and something fierce and protective blazed in his gaze. "Marcus, have a room prepared for Miss Stormcloak, the one in the East Tower with the view of the valley." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The East Tower? My lord, that's right next to your own chambers." Garrick's expression dared his second to comment further. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all, my lord. I'll see to it immediately." As Marcus hurried away, Garrick turned back to Elodie. "You must be exhausted. Let me show you to your room, and then we can have the castle healer look at those bruises." Elodie glanced down at herself, and was surprised to see purple marks already forming on her arms where the bandits had grabbed her. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made her sway on her feet. Actually, a room sounds perfect. Garrick led her through the castle, and despite her exhaustion, Elodie couldn't help but take in her surroundings with sharp interest. The castle was not the cold, forbidding place she had imagined. Yes, it was designed for war, with its thick walls and strategic layouts. But it was also beautiful in its own austere way. Tapestries hung on the walls depicting battles and hunts. Weapons were displayed with the reverence usually reserved for art. And everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of a ruler who cared about more than just conquest. The East Tower room was breathtaking. Large windows overlooked the valley, offering a view that stretched for miles. The bed was enormous, piled high with furs and soft linens. A fire crackled in the hearth, warming the space. And on a small table by the window sat a vase of wildflowers, the same kind that grew near her village. "You planned this," she said, turning to look at Garrick. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I hoped. I didn't plan. There's a difference. When did you have time to prepare this room?" "I didn't. I sent word ahead while we were running. The flowers were already in my chambers. I've been collecting them every time I rode near your village, though I never admitted to myself why." Elodie felt her heart squeeze painfully. This powerful man, this alpha king, had been collecting wildflowers like a lovesick boy, hoping for a chance that she might someday come to his castle. "You're not what I expected," she admitted softly. "Neither are you." He moved closer, his hand coming up to tuck a strand of white hair behind her ear. "I expected someone who would need protecting, someone who would look to me to solve all her problems. Instead, I found someone who makes me want to be better. Someone who challenges me to think differently about everything I thought I knew. Garrick, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be someone's mate. I don't know how to share my life without losing myself. Then we'll figure it out together. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. I don't need you to change who you are, Elodie. I need you to stay exactly as you are, strong and stubborn and willing to tell me when I'm being an idiot. That's the woman I want. That's the woman I need. A knock at the door interrupted them. Garrick called out permission to enter, and an elderly woman bustled in, her arms full of medical supplies. This is Helena, Garrick introduced, the castle healer. She'll take care of those bruises. Helena shooed Garrick out of the room with the ease of someone who had known him since childhood, and Elodie found herself smiling at the way the powerful Alpha King obeyed without argument. Now then, dearie, Helena said briskly, setting down her supplies and beginning to examine Elodie's injuries. Let's get you cleaned up and properly tended, and you can tell me all about how you managed to catch our king's attention. In all my years serving this castle, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. As Helena worked, Elodie found herself relaxing, the healer's gentle efficiency and kind words soothing something in her that had been wound tight for so long. And when she was finally alone, clean and bandaged and dressed in a soft nightgown that someone had left on the bed, she moved to the window and looked out over the valley. In the distance, she could see the smoke from her village, could imagine her mother going about her evening routines, unaware that her eldest daughter had just committed to a future she had never imagined. A soft knock made her turn. Garrick stood in the doorway, his hair still damp from a bath, dressed in simple clothes that somehow made him look more approachable than his armor ever had. May I come in? It's your castle. He smiled. But it's your room. I won't enter without permission. She gestured him forward, and he moved to stand beside her at the window. For a long moment, they simply stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow, Garrick said quietly, I want to introduce you to the council. I want them to know that you're not just a guest, that you have a voice here, a place at my side. Elodie turned to look at him in surprise. You're serious? Completely. You said you didn't want to lose yourself in this partnership, so I'm giving you the tools to maintain your autonomy. Join my council, share your insights, help me rule this kingdom. You have a strategic mind, Elodie. I saw it in the way you fought those rogues in your village. I saw it in the way you positioned yourself during the bandit attack. Don't waste that gift. She felt tears sting her eyes again, overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of this man, of this situation. No one is going to accept a human woman with no training as a member of your council. Then we'll train you. And as for them accepting you, he turned to face her fully, his eyes blazing with determination. They'll accept you because I command it. But more importantly, they'll come to respect you because you'll earn it, just as you've earned everything else in your life. Elodie reached up and cupped his face, marveling at the way this fierce warrior softened under her touch. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for respecting me, for not asking me to be anything less than I am. Garrick turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. I should be thanking you for giving me a chance after I was foolish enough to think I could claim you like a prize. You've taught me more about strength and honor in a few weeks than I learned in years of warfare. He moved to leave, to give her the space and rest she needed. But Elodie stopped him with a hand on his arm. Stay, she said softly. Not for anything improper. Just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight. She saw the war in his expression, the desire warring with respect, the need tempered by his determination to do right by her. Finally, he nodded. I'll stay, but I'll sleep in the chair by the fire. I won't presume more than you're ready to give. Elodie smiled, warmth flooding through her chest. You really are nothing like I expected, Garrick Wolfsreach. As she settled into the enormous bed, as Garrick positioned himself in the chair with his long legs stretched out toward the fire, Elodie felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. Protected. But more than that, she felt seen. Valued. Respected for exactly who she was. And as she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth more than her independence. She had found someone who valued her independence as much as she did. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Elodie threw herself into learning everything she could about the kingdom, about politics and strategy, about the complex web of alliances and territories that Garrick governed. She attended council meetings, sitting at Garrick's right hand, and though the other council members were initially skeptical, she gradually won them over with her sharp insights and her refusal to be intimidated. Garrick watched her bloom with pride that bordered on worship. She was magnificent in her element, her white hair pulled back in a practical braid, her crimson dress replaced by more functional clothing that allowed her to move freely. She debated with seasoned warriors and held her ground with diplomats twice her age. And when she smiled at him across the council table, acknowledging some point he had made, he felt his heart squeeze in his chest. But it wasn't just in the council chambers that Elodie made her mark. She trained with the warriors, learning proper combat techniques to supplement her raw courage. She walked through the castle grounds, learning the names of servants and guards alike, treating everyone with the same respect, regardless of their rank. She spent hours in the library, devouring books on history and warfare and strategy. And through it all, Garrick courted her with a patience and care that surprised everyone who knew him. He brought her wildflowers from the valley. He arranged for her mother to visit, ensuring Ardes had comfortable chambers and was treated with honor. He asked Elodie's opinion on matters great and small, valuing her input not because she was his mate, but because she was brilliant and insightful and saw things from angles he would never have considered. But he didn't push for more than she was ready to give. He respected the boundaries she set, even when it cost him sleepless nights and a constant ache that lived in his bones. He wanted her with an intensity that sometimes frightened him, but he wanted her willing more than he wanted satisfaction. One evening, 2 months after Elodie had arrived at the castle, they stood together on the battlements, looking out over the kingdom as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold. Elodie had just successfully negotiated a trade agreement with a neighboring territory, her first major political victory, and the celebration feast was still echoing through the halls below them. "You were brilliant today," Garrick said softly, his arm draped casually around her waist. "The way you outmaneuvered Lord Brennan when he tried to renegotiate the grain prices was masterful." Elodie leaned into him, savoring the warmth and strength of his body against hers. "I learned from the best. You would have done the same." "Maybe. But you did it with more grace than I ever could have managed. I would have just threatened him." She laughed, the sound light and free. "Sometimes threats have their place. Is that so?" He turned to face her, his silver eyes glinting with amusement and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "And what would you threaten me with, Elodie Stormcloak?" She pretended to consider this, tapping one finger against her lips. "I could threaten to stop attending your council meetings. Leave you to deal with Lord Brennan's tedious negotiations alone. Cruel woman. I could threaten to stop training with your warriors, deprive them of the entertainment of watching me knock Marcus on his backside. You've done that exactly once, and he claims he let you win. He didn't let me win. I'm just that good." Garrick laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and pulled her closer. "What else? What other terrible fates would you threaten me with?" Elodie's smile softened, her expression turning serious. "I could threaten to stop falling in love with you, but I think it's too late for that." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Garrick went very still, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable, and utterly safe all at once. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you," Elodie said, and saying it felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. "I didn't mean to. I fought it every step of the way. But you've been patient and kind and respectful. You've valued my strength instead of trying to diminish it. You've made me feel like I can be both powerful and loved, independent and partnered. And I love you for it. I love you for seeing me. I love you for being exactly who you are, fierce with the world and gentle with me." Garrick's hands came up to frame her face, his touch reverent. "I have loved you since the moment you looked at me in that village square and told me no. I have loved you every day since, watching you become more of yourself rather than less. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, Elodie Stormcloak. You are my heart, my soul, my mate, my queen." "Then claim me," she whispered. "I'm ready. I'm yours." His kiss was different this time. Where before it had been tentative, respectful, now it was claiming and possessive, and full of all the hunger he had been restraining. Elodie melted into him, her hands tangling in his long hair, her body pressed against his as though she could crawl inside his skin and make a home there. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrick rested his forehead against hers. "Come to my chambers tonight. Be with me. Let me show you how much you mean to me." "Yes," she said simply, and felt the rightness of it resonate through every fiber of her being. That night, in Garrick's chambers with the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, they came together with a passion that had been building for months. He was gentle and fierce by turns, worshipping her body with hands and mouth, and whispered words of devotion. And when they finally joined, when they became one in the most elemental way possible, Elodie felt the mate bond snap into place with such force that it stole her breath. She could feel him now, not just physically, but emotionally. She could sense his love like a tangible thing wrapped around her heart. She could feel his wonder, his joy, his absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. And he could feel her too. Could feel the way she had finally let down every wall, every defense. Could feel her love blazing bright and fierce, a flame that would never be extinguished. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in his enormous bed, Garrick traced patterns on her bare skin and spoke quietly into the darkness. "I want you to know that nothing has to change. You can still train with the warriors. You can still sit on my council. You can still be everything you were before tonight. This doesn't make you less. It makes you more." Elodie turned in his arms to face him, her white hair spread across his pillows like he had imagined so many times. "I know. That's why I finally let myself have this. Have you? Because you've proven that you see partnership as addition, not subtraction. You've proven that loving you doesn't mean losing myself." She paused, her hand coming up to rest over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her palm. "And because I realized that being strong doesn't mean being alone, that accepting love isn't weakness, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your heart to someone who has earned the right to be there." Garrick captured her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You've taught me so much, Elodie. You've shown me that true strength isn't about domination or control. It's about respecting the autonomy of those you love. It's about building something together that's stronger than anything either of us could build alone." "So what happens now?" she asked. "Do I become your queen officially? Is there some ceremony?" He smiled. "If you'll have me, yes. We'll have a mating ceremony, binding ourselves before the pack and the kingdom. You'll rule at my side, not as my possession, but as my equal. We'll face whatever challenges come together." I like the sound of that. "Good. Because I intend to spend the rest of my very long life making sure you never regret giving me a chance." Elodie kissed him again, slow and deep. pouring everything she felt into the gesture. "I could never regret this. You're the best decision I never meant to make." They made love again as the moon rose higher in the sky, and this time it was slower, more tender, a reaffirmation of everything they had promised each other. And when they finally fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, both felt a peace they had never known before. Two souls, finally complete. The mating ceremony took place under a full moon, exactly 3 months after the attack on Elodie's village. The entire pack gathered in the great courtyard of Shadowmere, warriors and servants alike bearing witness to the joining of their Alpha King and his chosen mate. Elodie wore a dress of deep crimson, her white hair left loose to flow around her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. Garrick stood before her in formal armor, but his eyes were soft as they traced every line of her face, memorizing this moment. Marcus performed the ceremony, his voice ringing out clear and strong as he spoke the ancient words of binding. When it came time for the vows, Garrick took Elodie's hands in his and spoke from his heart. "I vow to honor your strength and never seek to diminish it. I vow to stand beside you, not above you. I vow to protect you when you need protecting and step back when you need to fight your own battles. I vow to love you as you are, fiercely independent and magnificently stubborn, for all the days of my life and beyond." Elodie's voice was steady and strong as she made her own vows. "I vow to be your partner in all things. I vow to challenge you when you need challenging and support you when you need support. I vow to bring my whole self to this union, holding nothing back. I vow to love you as you are, warrior and protector, and the gentlest man I've ever known, for all the days of my life and beyond." When Marcus declared them mated before the pack, Garrick pulled Elodie into his arms and kissed her with such tenderness that several of the watching warriors had to clear their throats and look away. The courtyard erupted in cheers, the sound echoing off the stone walls and rising into the night sky. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. Elodie's mother came from the village, tears of joy streaming down her face as she embraced her daughter and welcomed Garrick into their family. Kiva sent a letter from the capital, congratulating her sister and expressing genuine happiness that Elodie had found her place. Warriors who had initially doubted Elodie now raised their cups in her honor, having come to respect her through her actions rather than her title. But the true test of their partnership came 6 months later, when a rival Alpha launched an attack on the Western Territories, seeking to take advantage of what he perceived as weakness now that the Alpha King had taken a human mate. The enemy Alpha, a brutal man named Corvus, led his forces across the border with the confidence of someone who believed victory was assured. He had underestimated 2 crucial things: the strength of Garrick's warriors and the strategic brilliance of his new queen. Elodie stood in the war room, her white hair pulled back in a practical braid, her crimson dress replaced by leather armor that Garrick had commissioned specifically for her. Around the table stood Garrick's generals and advisors, all waiting for their king's orders. But it was Elodie who spoke first, her finger tracing routes on the map spread before them. "Corvus is expecting us to meet him head-on at the border. His forces are positioned for a direct confrontation, with his strongest warriors at the front and his supplies protected in the rear." She looked up, her eyes sharp with tactical insight. "So we don't meet him head-on. We split our forces. Garrick leads the main army to engage Corvus directly, but we send a smaller, faster force through the mountain passes here and here." She pointed to 2 narrow routes on the map. "They circle behind his lines, cut off his supply train, and create chaos in his ranks. While he's trying to figure out what's happening, our main force pushes forward. We crush him between 2 fronts." One of the generals, an old warrior named Theron, frowned skeptically. "The mountain passes are dangerous. We could lose warriors attempting them." Elodie met his gaze steadily. "We'll lose more warriors in a direct confrontation against an entrenched enemy. The mountain passes are dangerous, but they're passable. I've studied the terrain. I know which routes are viable." Garrick had been watching her with undisguised pride and love, and now he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "My queen's strategy is sound. we implement her plan. Over the next 3 days, Elodie's strategy unfolded with devastating effectiveness. Garrick led the main force against Corvus's army, engaging them in fierce combat that drew all of the enemy's attention. Meanwhile, 2 strike forces led by Marcus and Theron navigated the treacherous mountain passes, moving with speed and precision. When they emerged behind Corvus's lines, when they set fire to his supply wagons and scattered his support troops, the enemy Alpha's confidence shattered. His forces found themselves trapped between 2 armies, their supplies gone, their morale broken. Corvus himself tried to flee, but Garrick hunted him down personally. The fight was brief and brutal, ending with the enemy Alpha's submission and the absorption of his territory into Garrick's kingdom. When Garrick returned to Shadowmere, bloodied but victorious, he found Elodie waiting for him on the steps of the castle. She had coordinated the defense from the war room, had directed troop movements and supply lines with the skill of a seasoned general. He dismounted and strode toward her, not caring that he was covered in blood and dirt, not caring that his entire army was watching. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, publicly claiming her not just as his mate, but as his equal in all things. When they finally broke apart, he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "This victory belongs to Queen Elodie. Her strategy saved lives and secured our borders. She has proven herself worthy of the crown she wears, not through bloodline but through merit. Let anyone who doubts her wisdom or her place at my side speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence that followed was profound. Then, one by one, the warriors began to pound their fists against their chests in the traditional salute of respect. The sound grew until it was deafening, until even the doubtful had joined in acknowledging what could no longer be denied. Elodie Stormcloak was not just the Alpha King's mate. She was a queen in her own right, a brilliant strategist and a fierce protector of the realm. That night, in their private chambers, Garrick held Elodie close as she finally allowed herself to shake with the aftermath of stress and fear. She had maintained her composure throughout the battle, had projected strength and confidence even when she was terrified that Garrick might not come back. "I was so afraid," she whispered against his chest. "I watched you ride off to battle, and I realized that loving you means living with the constant fear of losing you." Garrick tightened his arms around her. "I feel the same fear every time you do something dangerous, every time you train with the warriors, every time you insist on riding patrol with the border guards. But I would never ask you to stop, because that fear is the price of loving someone who is truly alive, someone who refuses to hide from the world." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We make a good team, the best." He brushed a strand of white hair from her face. "You saw patterns in the battle that I would have missed. You thought 3 steps ahead while I was focused on the immediate threat. Together, we're stronger than either of us could be alone. Is that what love is?" she asked softly, not completing each other, but enhancing each other. Not filling in gaps, but building something entirely new together? "Yes." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "That's exactly what love is. At least, that's what our love is. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in this world or any other." The years that followed were marked by prosperity and growth. Under the joint rule of Garrick and Elodie, the kingdom flourished. They reformed laws to be more just, strengthened defenses to be more effective, and created alliances that brought stability to the entire region. Elodie's reputation as a brilliant strategist spread far beyond their borders. Other rulers sought her counsel. Young women from across the kingdom came to Shadowmere hoping to train under her guidance, wanting to prove that they too could be both warriors and women, both strong and loved. And Garrick became known not just as a fierce Alpha King, but as a ruler who valued wisdom over brute force, who listened to his queen's counsel, who demonstrated that true strength included the ability to respect and honor the partner at your side. They faced challenges, of course. There were those who sought to test their rule, enemies who thought they could exploit what they perceived as softness. But Garrick and Elodie met every challenge together, their combined strengths proving insurmountable. And through it all, their love deepened. Not the wild, desperate passion of new mates, but something richer and more enduring. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs. They fought sometimes, both too stubborn to back down easily. But they always came back together, always remembered what they had built and what they stood to lose. On the 5th anniversary of their mating, Elodie stood on the balcony where she had first arrived at the castle, looking out over the valley below. So much had changed since that night when Garrick had carried her through the forest, since the moment she had decided to take a chance on a love she had never thought she wanted. She felt him before she heard him, the mate bond alerting her to his presence. Garrick's arms came around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured into her hair. "Everything. Nothing. How strange life is. How 5 years ago I was so certain I didn't need anyone, and now I can't imagine a single day without you. Regrets? Not one." She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. This had been weathered by time and battle, but his eyes still held the same fierce devotion they had held on the night they met. "You kept your promises, Garrick, every single one. You honored my strength. You stood beside me, not above me. You let me be exactly who I am. And you kept yours." He kissed her softly. "You brought your whole self to this union. You challenged me when I needed it. You loved me as I am. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." "So what happens now?" she asked, echoing the question she had asked him so long ago. "We've built a kingdom. We've faced enemies. We've proven our partnership. What's left?" Garrick smiled, and it transformed his face into something beautiful and gentle. "Everything. We have our whole lives ahead of us, Elodie. Every day is a new chance to choose each other, to build something meaningful, to love each other deeper than we did the day before. That's the real journey, not the dramatic battles or the great victories, but the quiet choice to keep showing up for each other, day after day, year after year." Elodie felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the profound simplicity of his words. "I choose you," she whispered. "Today and every day after. I choose us, and I choose you." Garrick pulled her close, and they stood there wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set over the kingdom they had built together. The life they had created not by surrendering who they were, but by becoming more fully themselves in the presence of the one who truly saw them. In the distance, wolves howled at the rising moon, their voices joining in the ancient song of pack and partnership and promises kept. And in the castle of Shadowmere, the Alpha King and his queen held each other close, two souls finally complete, ready to face whatever came next with the certainty that they would face it together. This was not the ending of their story. It was simply the beginning of a love that would endure through all the years to come, through challenges and triumphs, through quiet moments and grand adventures. A love that had begun with a refusal and a challenge, with stubbornness and strength, with two people brave enough to be exactly who they were, and wise enough to choose each other anyway. And that, more than any kingdom or crown or conquest, was the greatest victory of all. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.